So welcome. This is a really unique symposium or institute. I don't know if I've ever been to something on incivility that has been kind of organized in this manner. So this is a topic that a lot of people get very emotional about, and very, wanting to talk about it, but also being careful about stepping on people's toes. So it's sensitive. I have just a few minutes that I'll spend talking, and then I'm going to introduce my two remote presenters and our presenter that's in the room. Last night, I sat down and thought about this a little more. I haven't had a whole lot of time. I'm going to shut this door. I think I'm competing. Hi, Melissa. Yeah, I'm in here. Okay, so I actually suggested this topic to Dr. Rex Lamore, my supervisor, the director of CCED. And when I suggested this topic at the time, I wasn't experiencing a whole lot of incivility in my life, but I knew that it was out there and it was happening. I think the place that I was experiencing it maybe the most was on Facebook, and a lot of us probably can agree with that. My uncle harassed me a few times when I posted my Elizabeth Warren videos, and my brother-in-law, he challenged my job and what I do because it's federally funded. And my brother commented on the fact that I post too many pictures on my Facebook because they're silly and annoying because they're my children. So these are all sort of contentious comments, and they are disagreeable kinds of discussions. But about a little over a week ago, I actually was hit much harder by an uncivil behavior situation. My son has endured sustained some injuries from a bully. And so this is now very, very real for me to have incivility in my home, in my community. And so it kind of makes me sad to think that my son will deal with these injuries for probably the rest of his life. So I think it's very ironic that I'm here to moderate this session. So the psychology behind incivility. I think this session is going to be really popular. I think you're really going to enjoy these presenters. I've talked to both of them, and George, being very close to us, he will be able to highlight and talk about maybe how incivility is occurring here in the Lansing area or in our region or even in our state. So we see uncivil behavior in grocery stores, malls, on the road, airports, neighborhoods, on TV, and in our social media pages and in the news. And today we're going to hear from these three experts, and they will shed some light on maybe why this is happening. If it's worse now than it has been in the past. Is it worse here in this nation, or is it all over the world? Is this a global problem? First, though, I'd like to show you a video. It's always fun to watch a video with a few clips, just to get our juices flowing and get us kind of in the mood to really discuss this. So if I could have Mr. Phipps turn our video on, just a few minutes. Is everybody hearing me on this, the Zoom?
Oh, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, fine.
Ready?
Great.
Republican healthcare plan is this. Die quickly. Is it an instinct? Part of our paleo cells.
That's just our nature to play that sort of game. Politics, like sports or war, is a reflection of our ability to come together to fight another week.
I feel like you're doing a little bit right. Excuse me, sir. Next time I prefer you let me finish my statements before you ask that question.
That's the way corporations and people, my friend.
So there's incivility.
I'm going to eliminate every non-essential expensive program I can find. That includes Obamacare. And I'm going to work to reform and save.
And enforcing of the debate.
but not five votes who are here to do.
Not good anymore, not new. Go further back, not 25 years, 200 years. There's been an actual cave on the Senate floor. A reporter shot a former member on these House steps. A vice president killed the former Treasury Secretary in a duel.
It's incredible that we actually can cooperate and live in relative peace with each other to begin with.
So Professor Heiter, he's a smart guy, I asked him, when is it all going to end? When are we going to go back to being friends? He says, bipartisanship historically in this country, as you saw, is the exception. It's not the rule. There's a period from 1930s to the 70s when bipartisanship, you hear about going out for drinks, Republicans, Democrats, after fighting on the House floor. When is it going to end? We don't even know. Nobody knows, Chuck.
Okay, so the definition of being civil is formal politeness and courtesy in behavior or speech. The definition of uncivil is without good manners, unmannerly, rude, impolite, and discourteous. My name is Jennifer Bruin, and I'll be your moderator. I have three great presenters, but I'm going to start with a list of names of people that I do not have here and that I will not have present to you. Sarah Palin, Rush Limbaugh, Jon Stewart, Rachel Maddow, Glenn Beck, and Bill O'Reilly. They're not here. We're going to hear from some people that really understand what is going on with this issue. So somebody once said, changing the way people talk can change the way they relate to each other and their problems. And that can eventually change the community. That would be Dr. Dave Matthews. David, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, so Dave Matthews is president of the Kettering Foundation, a nonprofit research foundation rooted in the American tradition of invention. Prior to his work with the foundation, Matthews served as Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare in the Ford administration. From 1965 to 1980, he taught history at the University of Alabama, where he also served as president from 1969 to 1980. Matthews earned an A.B. degree in history and classical Greek. After graduating Phi Beta Kappa from the University of Alabama, he received his Ph.D. in history from Columbia University. Matthews has served on the boards of a variety of organizations, currently including the Gerald R. Ford Foundation, National Issues Forums Institute, Southern Institute on Children and Families, and Public Agenda. He has received numerous awards, and in 2007, the Alabama Center for Civic Life was renamed in his honor. He is also the recipient of 17 honorary degrees. Matthews has written extensively on Southern history, public policy, education, and international problem solving. His books include Politics for People, Finding a Responsible Public Voice, Reclaiming Public Education by Reclaiming Our Democracy, and The Ecology of Democracy, Finding Ways to Have a Stronger Hand in Shaping Our Future. Next presenter would be David Dunning. David, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, Dr. Dunning is a professor of psychology at Cornell University, where he has been since receiving his PhD from Stanford University and his BA from Michigan State University. His primary research focus is on psychology of human misbelief, in particular the misconceptions people hold of their own competence and character. This work has been discussed several times in the New York Times, The Atlantic, The Guardian, Pacific Standard, National Public Radio, BBC, CBC, and even a Doonesbury cartoon. He is past president of the Society of Experimental Social Psychology and incoming president of the Society for the Study of Motivation. He has been a visiting scholar at Yale University, University of Michigan, University of Mannheim, and the University of Cologne. This summer, he will be moving to the University of Michigan. And Mr. Lahanis, George, East Lansing City Manager, began his tenure with the city in 1999. Since that time, Lahanis has served as the interim city manager of East Lansing since October 2011, and prior to that, served as the deputy city manager of East Lansing from July 2008 to October 2011. He has served in various capacities with the city of East Lansing since 1999, including serving as a labor relations specialist from 1999 to 2001. The Director of Human Resources from 2001 to 2005, and the Director of Administrative Services from 2005 to 2008. In January 2012, he was selected as the 5th city manager to serve East Lansing in its history. Originally from New York City, George came to Michigan to attend Northern Michigan University, where he earned a BS in criminal justice with a minor in English. He subsequently completed his master's degree in public administration, also from Northern Michigan University. Over the 15 years that George has been employed by the city of East Lansing, he has distinguished himself by upholding a high standard of professionalism. He has represented the city of East Lansing on Regional 911 Collaboration Committee, served as chief spokesperson for the city of East Lansing during collective bargaining negotiations, co-chaired the city's collaborative healthcare task force, and served as staff liaison to the Human Relations Commission. I feel we have three very qualified experts. So let's get started. Dr. Matthews, can we start with you?
Yes, you can.
Could you please give a brief overview of the work you have been doing with the Kettering Foundation and any other work that's related to uncivil behavior or incivility?
Well, despite being called a foundation, Kettering actually is a research institute. And it was started by inventors. And like inventors, we do our research by observing experiments. Two of those experiments I thought would be relevant to what you're talking about. The first has to do with conflict within and between nations, particularly in our case for over 50 years, looking at the efforts of citizens, not official diplomats, to do something about the conflict between the United States and the USSR, and eventually the United States and Russia. You recall in the Cold War era, this was matter more than just being not polite. This was the had the potential. This conflict had the potential to unleash a nuclear war on the world. We've also had a chance to look at conflict and the way people deal with each other in the Middle East as a result of our work with the Arab Democracy Network, and also within Israel with a very interesting organization called Citizens Accord, which looks at conflict within Israel, both within the Jewish community, different sects of the Jewish community, and between the Jewish community and the Arabs, all of whom are Israelis. So that's one area. The second area is in the United States, looking at communities that are trying to come together to solve problems that they have to come together to solve, but have great difficulty because they aren't alike one another, and they don't like one another, and they don't even trust one another. The finding that we've had, maybe finding is too strong a word, maybe the impression that we have from watching these different areas of conflict is that civility is not a precondition to working together. It's the result of working together. The reason for that's very simple. If you need somebody and you're working with to get something done that you need to have done, you're going to temper what you have to say to them. You're going to, I don't know whether you're going to be a model of politeness, but you are going to be tempered in your remarks. I'll give you one story that will illustrate what we've been seeing. This was a community that was really down and out. The economy was terrible. The public schools were awful. There were high levels of corruption. The members of the school board were in jail. Well, that wasn't too bad because members of the city council were in jail too, and so they could visit with one another. But this was a city with deep racial conflicts, and every effort to improve the situation just came to nothing. I mean, in one case, they had a levy to increase funding for the schools, and even the teachers voted against it. So a little group that had been working valiantly to do something about this situation finally asked themselves a question. Who's not in this room that needs to be in this room if we're going to solve these problems? Well, they started off with the mayor and the sheriff and the superintendent of education. But the real problem was that nobody was proud of the city. In fact, they were ashamed of it. And there wasn't really a lot that these officials could do. So they decided that the person that wasn't in the room that needed to be in the room was, in fact, the son of a bitch down the street. Wasn't he in the room because he hadn't been invited? Well, he hadn't. If he had been invited, would he have come? No. Then the next question, and the one that brought about some real change, was what room is he in? And how do we get into his room? Okay. That began, and it took more than a decade, that began a real renaissance in that city. Today, the city has a reasonably thriving economy, a lot of foreign investment that would not have come in before. The schools are pretty good. Not all are good, but some of the best in the state are there. The officials are reasonably honest. They've had a black mayor elected by white voters and a white mayor elected by black voters. Is it nirvana? No. Are they just going around the street singing Kumbaya and hugging one another? No. Can you really say that this change in attitude and strategy was the sole reason for the turnaround? No. Did it help? Probably so. Civility is not a precondition. It's a result of knowing that you need somebody, even the son of a bitch down the street.
Thank you, Dr. Matthews. You don't even see your audience, do you?
Now I have a great view of a city, of a ceiling and a chandelier. Oh, you have real people. That's wonderful.
Thank you. My student came and told me, Jen, he's seeing a ceiling. That's all he's seeing. So now you can see all their wonderful faces. Okay, so.
Well,
go ahead, Dr. Matthews.
I thought the ceiling was very unexpressive.
I forgot to mention that he's beaming in from Dayton, Ohio, correct?
Yes, we have Kettering has an office in Dayton, New York, and Washington.
Okay, great. We'll get back to you with some questions. I'd like to move on to Dr. David Dunning. We're going to have to stick to your last names because we have two Davids. Dr. Dunning, are you ready? Just maybe 5 minutes. Maybe a few more minutes.
5 minutes.
We started early, right? Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm going to try to do two things here to show you some PowerPoint slides. I'm a research psychologist, so I don't think unless I'm showing slides. That looks right. And hopefully this will work. Cross your fingers. Okay. Is everybody seeing the slides?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, good. I want to thank you for inviting me to this session today and being able to do so from the comfort of my own home. Because I'm sure the way the airlines are working on the East Coast, that if I tried to make it to Lansing, I'd be doing this in the comfort of a lobby in Philadelphia Airport. Now, what I'm here to talk about a little bit is if I wanted to compress 50 years of work on incivility, where would I start and how would I compress it down to 10 minutes? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with some very basic principles. But I can already see that there are going to be some principles that will cross-cut and reinforce what Dr. Matthews has said. And the first place that I would start is by basically saying that one of the things we don't know, but one of the things psychology has certainly shown, is that our brain actually doesn't present the world to us the way that it actually is. Now, we believe that. We act as if that is so. But quite frankly, our brain is an artist that's adjusting colors, distances, throwing things away from information that we see, adding other information. And luckily, there's been a nice demonstration of this in the past 2 weeks concerning the quote-unquote dress that broke the internet. Now, I assume most of you have heard about this. And what you see in front of you right now is a panel of 3 dresses. The dress that broke the internet is the middle one. And the reason I bring it up is that some people see this dress as white and gold. Other people see this dress as black and blue. And there's been a raging, sometimes in civil war on the internet, about what color this dress really is. And what I'd like to point out about this incident is that, first, in dealing with incivility, what we have to watch out for is the fact that our brain has some tendencies that are mostly for the good, but will tend to steer us toward being incivil. And second, it can even create arguments about what the color is of a dress. But it really isn't about the dress per se. It really is about the fact that what our brain is doing is adjusting, making choices, changing, making decisions about what we see. And sometimes those choices lead us to differ in terms of what we're going to believe or what we're going to think is true. And I have hundreds of examples of this on my computer. For example, many of you looking at the first photograph see the face of a woman, though some of you will see what looks to be a Bill Clinton type character playing saxophone. If you can't see it, don't worry, it's there. In the middle picture, some of you will see a rabbit, some of you will see a duck. Different brains make different decisions. And in the third picture, some of you you're seeing a little girl kick a ball, but some of you are seeing the girl kick the ball towards you. Some of you are seeing the girl kick the ball away from you. Now, this is all having to do with adjustments that the brain is making to, for the most part, help you. But what it does mean is that people can steer toward different conclusions about something that's so patently there. It's in front of their eyes. How can they not believe their eyes? But second, the brain, being a consummate and very skilled artist, does one final trick, which is the trick that's going to steer us toward incivility. And that is making us believe that what we're seeing is actually out there. What we're seeing is true. What we're seeing out there is the world. Quite frankly, you may think that you're looking at a person's face in a screen in front of the room. That's what your brain is telling you you're seeing. But actually what you're reacting to are neurochemical, electrical impulses in that squishy 3-pound organ in your head. But your brain doesn't portray it that way. It portrays things as being out there in the world and being true. And that's true not only of what we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we touch, what we smell. It's also true of what we believe. It's also true of what we value. The brain imbues all of it with this air of truth, that we are seeing the things that are the way they really are. But here is the problem. That's true even when we're wrong. That's the kicker, that we can come to wrong conclusions. But those wrong conclusions have the look and smell, thanks to our brain, of looking like the truth. And let me just give you an example of this. This is an example of an item from a quick quiz we gave people in intuitive physics a few years ago, where on the left side, you see a tube lying on the table, and you can see where the arrow points to where we've rolled a ball into the tube. And the question is, when that ball rolls out of the tube, what is its trajectory going to be? Is it going to take trajectory A, B, C, or D? And the thing to tell you that there is a right answer, point blank, and most of you are going to get it. But there's also a wrong answer that a lot of people are going to think, are going to believe. And the thing that I want to tell you is, for those of you getting the wrong answer, don't worry. Aristotle would have answered the same way, and any learned scholar circa 1600 would have answered the same way. But the key is there's a right way, but there's also an alluring wrong way. And what that means is, what you can have are people who are right, people who are wrong, but almost be as equally confident in their conclusions. They see it the way it is. The other side must be wrong. And I can show this in this graph, in which what I have is a test where we gave people 6 of items like this. And what we did is we basically graphed how many they actually got right. That's the horizontal axis. versus how many they think they got right. That's the vertical axis. And what you see is, for those who are getting things pretty much right, that's the solid white arrow. They know it. They know that they're getting things right. And as people start to get more and more things wrong, they think they're doing less well. Terrific. That's the way it should be. But note what happens at the bottom end, where people start getting every item wrong. Confidence in you getting things right doesn't go down. It starts going back up. That's the dashed arrow. And so you end up with people who are believing they're almost getting a perfect score. And they're, in some sense, they're right. They have a perfect score, but the perfectionists are getting 0 out of 6 right. But the key here is that you can have a right answer or a wrong answer, but both answers have the look and smell, if you will, of truth. Now, what does this suggest? I'll suggest that two things. The first is that sometimes life is complex. There are problems that you have to solve, and we're all flawed intellects in the sense that sometimes we come to solutions that actually aren't optimal. And this is my favorite picture of a non-optimal solution to a problem. Boy, will he be surprised in about 1 minute. But the second thing is what that means is because our brain tilts us toward believing what we see as the truth, we tend to, even when we're wrong, believe that we are right, which can lead to lots of incivility and potentially incivilities we really shouldn't be having. And just to give you another quick notion of that, this is a graph of students who have just taken an exam. They're leaving the exam. We will find out how well they actually did on the exam. That's the blue line. And what I want to point your attention to are the people who are at the bottom in terms of how well they did. They're at best, they're getting a D in this class based on this exam. Note how positively they rate their test performance and their perceived mastery. They don't know they're at the bottom. In fact, they think they're outperforming a majority of their peers. They're experiencing what has come to be known, and I apologize that we didn't name it this way, as the Dunning-Kruger effect. They're wrong, but they have very little insight into knowing they're wrong. And we've demonstrated this in a number of ways. And I believe this was an observation that I wrote about that brought our work to Jennifer's attention. But what this means for civility, I think, is the following. I do want to wrap up and make sure I'm somewhere near my time. Is that it's important to think about two things whenever you're dealing with arguments. The first is that you really do need to hold your breath, because your brain is designed to make you believe what you see or what you believe is true, period, and that anything that differs is untrue. And that's true even of things that are patently wrong. That is, misbelief has the look and feel of truth, which means that when involved in an argument, before becoming uncivil, I think it's important to think of the old adage that when arguing with a fool, make sure that the other person isn't likewise engaged. That is, check your own assumptions, check your own thoughts or beliefs. It may be the case that you're the fool that's, and we all step into this role sooner or later. We're the fool that's actually arguing the wrong side of the case. What that ultimately leads to, and where I'd like to resonate somewhat with what Dr. Matthews said, is that our brain has a first option of telling us what we believe is true. Sometimes when it matters, what we're going to have to do is replace that first option with a habit that, of respect. That is, instead of just going with what we believe to be true, when dealing with other people, particularly dealing with other people with different interests or dealing with people with different ideas, that we have to show respect to them and their ideas and not just sit and listen and talk and try to work out the situation that you have in front of you. Now, in other studies I have, we show that people have lots and lots of respect. They know the habits. The only question is, are they going to do them? Now, respect doesn't mean you believe the other person may be right. Respect means you're going to deal with the other person and be civil, even when you think that they're not right. That's where I resonate with Dr. Matthews with the idea that civility follows from behavior and working together. It's not, you can't establish an attitude of belief of the other side and then work with them. No, you really have to go the reverse way of dealing with people, even when you think that that's a fool's errand, literally. You may be surprised at what happens as a result or a product of such an activity. Let me stop there because I'm sure I've gone over.
Thank you, Dr. Dunning. Does anybody want to raise their hand admitting that at some point they've been a fool? There we go, humbling. Dr. Lamore's raising his hand. Okay, well, our next presenter is Mr. George Lahanas, and he's going to spend about 5 minutes. That's about all we're going to have left, and then we'll go into some discussion, okay?
Well, I want to say thank you for having me. I really think it's a great opportunity for us in local government to talk about the issue of civility. And one of the reasons I think it's a great opportunity is because local governments local government to our citizens and residents, right? We're the ones that interact with the most on a normal basis. We're the ones who come out and hopefully plow the street in front of your house. We're the ones who fix the pothole. We're the ones who send a police officer if you need one. We're the ones that plan the land use all around you and make the future of your community. So as a democracy, we have this vested interest in making sure we have people that we can engage with on a regular basis. And to the extent that things aren't going well with how people interact with us, I think that has a negative impact on government. So we have a strong interest in civility. And what I would say about the current state of civility from what I've seen from our observations is that we have a lot of room for improvement. So that's my optimistic side. There's a lot of room for improvement. So why would I say that is because I think what happens and tends to happen in local government is the people who come to the podium on a regular basis that are your regular people who provide input tend to come with a negative view of what they're presenting on. So what we say typically to that is that happy people don't come to local government. Happy people are happy, so they stay home. The people who come and interact with us tend to be people who are upset about something, they're mad about something, and they want to let that be known. So whether that's true or not, or maybe that's just a good assumption that we like to have, that most people are happy, but only the upset people are here, that's to be seen, I guess, and that's our view, though. So I also think that local government hasn't done the best job of encouraging good civic engagement between residents. An area of particular room for improvement, I think, over the past couple of years, past decades actually, has been this notion that we are dealing with customers, that customers are, in the private sector, we're going to be more like business, and we're going to provide excellent customer service, and we're going to make our customers happy. Well, I don't think we've done a real service in terms of how we interact with people who live in our communities by referring to them as customers, because they're not really customers, they're citizens. They have a stake, they have ownership in that government. So when we talk about a customer gives responsibility and says, you know, my steak was supposed to be medium and it's well done, so please take it back and bring me something else. I wanted the purple shirt, not a white shirt. Please find me a purple shirt. And if they're polite, they'll say, please. So I think that, yes, purple. So I think that our experience is that citizens don't give responsibility away to make me happy as a customer. Citizens take responsibility for the community, for the government. They own the government. So I think a citizen is really just the opposite in a way of a customer. And I think when we think about citizens and citizenship, we think about a person who has an ideal behaviors in a community, right? They vote, they provide services, they volunteer, they have an ethic of commitment to their community. They disagree without discourtesy, which is what we heard before, and that they're positively engaged in civic life. So I want to give just a brief true example that I think epitomizes some of the negativeness that can happen. It's very unfortunate, and maybe see some of the effect it has on local government. We have a very recent discussion about closing a community center. That's a very difficult discussion to have because people have very heartfelt strength and commitment to that building if they live nearby especially. So we had people come to the podium during a public meeting and say they're very upset about it, which is fine because you expect that. We had a couple of people, or at least one in particular, who came to the podium and said, I am so offended by this decision that I believe that you and the other public officials here must have backroom deals and you must be getting money for this. You must be paid off. So they basically said out in public that all the officials are corrupt. I so disagree with your decision that you can't possibly be making a decision without the fact that you're getting paid for it because it's so out of my range of normal. And I really thought, wow, what a damaging comment to make in front of lots of people about government. The people are here in service, they're giving their service and their commitment to this community. Other citizens are here weighing in. Is this going to build community, make people have faith in government? Certainly not. Hopefully they don't believe it. But is this going to make a next generation of young people want to be in public service, run for office, fill those political offices, do public service like I do. Hopefully it doesn't have that damage, but you can certainly see that it could have that damage. So our approach has always been in local government is broadening the base of input. We think that perhaps if this is a negative cadre of people, that if we get a much larger group of people, perhaps the norms will equal themselves out. So that has been our approach, is to sort of, a good comment I've heard about is civic engagement creates involved citizens instead of demanding customers. So I think from our perspective, we've done a lot to engage positive civic engagement. There's a great article that was written by a city manager, a professional journal article by the name of Ed Everett from Redmond, California, about how cities really have an ethical obligation to positively engage in civic engagement with their residents. So some of the things we've done, we've strengthened our connection to neighborhood associations, trying to drive a lot of information sharing. We provide mini grants to neighborhood associations to do community building events, everything from a potluck to a children's holiday parade where they parade with their Halloween costumes on and do pumpkin carving. We have a Citizens Academy where we have 6 weeks of residents, 20 residents apply to learn about the community, the city of East Lansing, to get to meet the people who run their city government, have a lot more understanding of their city government, and hopefully be involved in a positive way. And that's something we try to do. We try to make a lot of opportunities for input, and we also try a lot in government transparency to make sure people know exactly what their government is doing. And if you know, hopefully you'll be compelled to say, I want to help solve the problems of government. I want to contribute in a positive way. A couple of successes we've had, and one I think was quite neat, has something called E-Town Hall. We started this about a month ago, and this is basically a town meeting but online. And our view is that people don't come to participate because there are barriers. It's 7:30 at night, you've got the lights in your face, they really don't want to come to the podium, and they're happy, so they're not going to put that effort out maybe. But they will go online at night on their mobile phone and tell us some input on stuff. So we've got tremendous feedback, actually. Hundreds and hundreds of views on stuff that I would have thought if we had a public hearing, we would have gotten 10 people to come. Lots of people weighing in. And the surprising thing is there's lots of positive comments, which we haven't really gotten that many at the podium. So for me, it almost makes the negative comments that are in there. And negative people write a lot more than happy people. Happy people write 3 lines. Negative people write essays to us. But it starts to make differences in what people look at, and they see these very negative comments amongst all of these polite ones. And I actually think perhaps it makes people stand out and say, is that the way you want to engage your government? Is that the way you want to look in front of your citizens? So we've also had some, we survey every 2 years and have had an uptick in interest in neighborhood associations and interest in that. So I think hopefully our goal is to broaden the base, get more people involved in civic life, treat people like citizens, and then hopefully try to eliminate, marginalize, move off this cadre of people who are very uncivil and I think are a danger sort of to the mission of local government. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, George. And this last strategy of having these open online comments, you're competing now with all the other social media, but apparently it's working. They're going there.
It is working.
Yeah, that's great. Let me put my mic back on. Okay, I have prepared a few questions, some of which you've already touched on, all 3 of you, just to get the discussion rolling. I'm sure this audience also has a lot of questions and a lot of comments. We'll wait just a few minutes, get them going, and then we'll move out to you guys and let you ask questions. And I'll walk around with the mic so that they can hear you. So I think we'll start maybe with Dr. Matthews, since you've been sitting there the longest. Can you hear me, Dr. Matthews?
I can hear you. I can.
Okay. I realize you did give us sort of some examples, but I'm wondering if, based on the work that you're doing with the Kettering Foundation and the Dave Matthews Center for Civic Life, what do you feel are proven successful strategies to help communities, individuals, organizations, or institutions become more civil?
Yes, I can answer that quickly. There aren't any, and there can't be any.
Okay.
And the reason there aren't any and there can't be any is that it all has to do not with strategies, but with mindsets, the way your mind works. For example, a neighbor of ours, Eleanor Ostrom, won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago by demonstrating that one of the reasons people are unhappy with city managers and city governments and state governments and federal governments and schools is that they are not as effective as they could be because they lack the support that they have traditionally gotten from what Eleanor called the co-production of public goods, okay? So that means that citizens have to be understood, and it's good that we're moving away from citizens as consumers, but unless citizens are doing some work themselves, unless they are workers and producers, not simply supporters showing up, paying taxes, baking cookies, but actually producing the good in economic well-being, the relationship is always going to be flawed, and there is going to be no successful strategy. So only when we see, and people see themselves as workers, co-producers of the things that city produces, only then when they are working together do they have a reason to treat each other the way people treat one another when they are working together. So moving from consumers to citizens is fine, but I think that's only halfway there. Citizens are workers, they're agents, that was Eleanor's term. They are producers of public goods, and it's that production that puts them in league with governments.
Dr. Dunning or Mr. Lahanas, do you have any comment about the strategies?
I actually think it's pretty optimistic for what we try to do. In the Citizens Academy, we have people who come and learn about government for 6 weeks. So they have like a stake already, and then they're getting to know the people they're going to be working with. And then likely a lot of times they come serve on boards or commissions, which are citizen volunteers and helping to weigh in on policy issues. And those are our, in some ways, almost a model citizen. They're giving their time and effort working with, in a sense, working with the council to enact policy. So I actually take that as a good thing. That was, in some ways, the more we had a community build in a park this past year. I mean, that's great showing of citizenship. People come and help build park structures for children. So I guess what I would take from that is the more we can engage someone, the more they can become like and more involved, actually helping doing. I think that's great, and I think that's sort of a great message for us moving forward.
Okay, I'll just interject with something quickly. I know one of the questions you're going to ask later is people are civil when, and my answer to that was when they have a common enemy. But there's a way that you could broaden that sort of principle to say that when they have a job that must be done, must be executed successfully, and the alternative is unthinkable. They have to succeed. There's a lot more cooperation in the Army. There's a lot more cooperation in sports teams because lack of cooperation brings about results that are unthinkable. And so I resonate with the idea that making citizens and involving them in the process where they're working towards successes that they're invested in also evokes this principle that if people have skin in the game, if there is an outcome that they want to desire, they're willing to set aside other things like conflicts that they might have when they're actively engaged. And I'll let Dr. Matthews respond.
Yeah, what we found is that you really have to get beyond citizens as volunteers and supporters of what institutions are doing. Citizens in their own right do a lot of educating. Citizens in their own right do a lot of things that affect health. But professionals don't recognize these because it doesn't look like what they do. So they want them to do what they do. We want you to make the budget. We want you to pretend that you're in the legislature. We want to. That's what professionals do. What citizens do is very different, and it's simply not recognized for what it is. It's a parallel universe. It's not necessarily a supportive universe. When in communities, for example, we found one where people said, everybody in this community feels obliged to do whatever they can do to educate these kids. Well, the businesses were having internship programs, the churches were doing after-school programs, the civic organizations were doing mentoring programs. They weren't supporting the schools and the institutions. They were doing their own educating. And that produced this working together. And our model right now is you come into the institution and do what we would like for you to do. When you like to bake some cookies for the next whatever, and it just doesn't get it.
Okay, I'd like to move on to a conversation that Dr. Dunning and I had on Monday that I found very interesting. He was able to shed some light on how we look, comparatively speaking, across the nation or the globe. And Dr. Dunning, could you spend just a minute or so to maybe give us some understanding of where we are in that?
Well, yes, the question was sort of in terms of incivility, where are we now? And I think the way that I would, in the United States, and I think the way that I would answer that question is, well, it all depends on who you're comparing us to. So if you compare us to the rest of the world, we're actually pretty civil. But if you compare us to developed countries like we are, Europe, Canada, and so forth, we're famously uncivil. That is, just to give you the statistic that to me brings us home, our murder rate right now in the United States is 4.7 people per year per 100,000. In Canada, it's 1.6, only a third. In Michigan, our murder rate is 4.5 per 100,000. In Ontario, just a step over the lake, it's 1.2. And so if you take a look at violent crime as an indicator, compared to other developed countries, we're behind. But I have to add two caveats to that. The first is that that's assuming that the United States is a single country, and you can make the argument that actually the United States is several different countries. And some of those regions or some of those countries have murder rates that are just like Canada's. And one region of the country, for the last 200, 300 years, has had a murder rate that is twice what it is in the rest of the country. And right now its murder rate is 6.5 people per 100,000. But if you also compare us to our past, we're also actually more civil than we have been in the past in terms of crime and violent crime. Murder rates have been going down for the last 100 years. Part of that is people don't die because of medicine anymore, but part of that is, quite frankly, that there does seem to be a historical trend toward becoming civil, and perhaps recognizing the incivility that remains among us is a recognition that we're becoming more civil, and we have some more perfect goals of more perfection that we might now see in sight. But so in some ways we don't compare very favorably, but in other ways we do compare favorably. It's instructive to take a look at the different comparisons.
We have a few more minutes, and then we'll open it up for question and answer. I just have two sentences, and I'd like you to finish them. And I think Dr. Dunning already answered that sentence or finished that sentence for me.
Right.
Incivility occurs because, Dr. Dunning? One word?
This is civility or incivility? Oh, unfortunately, you're dropping out, so I'll answer both questions. Civility happens when both groups have a common enemy. Incivility happens when other people literally do not listen to what the other person is saying.
Dr. Matthews, can you finish that sentence? Incivility occurs because...
Civility is a product of recognizing that we need other people even though we're not like them and may not particularly like them.
And Mr. Lahanas?
You know, I actually think what Dr. Dunning said was quite clever about encouraging people on being listened to, because the people who come to the meetings, if they're not always getting their way, that's when we have the most upset reaction, hardest reaction. So I actually think that there's some lack of understanding of 10 people at the podium. I've heard many times you say everyone is against what you're doing, and of course we have 48,000 residents. So it's pretty hard to judge if the 10 are actually representing all 48,000. But if people don't get their way, they tend to get, more angry and more uncivil. So I think it's exactly true.
So I think you can all agree that respect, courteous, this whole definition of civility is accurate. And that's where we need to go to be more.
And if I could interject something. Yes, I could interject one final thought in terms of what America is to compare to. One of the things Jennifer and I discussed on Monday is that we all really do have very skilled habits in terms of politeness, respect, deflecting conflict, and having constructive conversations. Unfortunately, we've all learned them, for the most part, at least my generation, in the realm of one-on-one actual conversations between person A and person B in the same room and actually working together. We live in a world now, however, where people can communicate via Facebook, via Twitter, via YouTube, and so forth. And my anthropologist friends tell me that the problem with those new technologies is people don't carry over the habits that they know one-on-one into these new technologies. And what we're going to have to do is learn how to establish respect or act in a civil or polite way in these new technologies. And what she pointed out is that we've done this successfully in the past. I mean, the phone was the Twitter of 100 years ago, and there was tremendous disagreement about how you acted on the phone, and phone calls didn't go very well. But over the last 100 years, now we're just as smooth over the phone as we are one-on-one. So one can be optimistic, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Well, thank you, all three of you. Thank you very much. I really, really appreciate all of your expertise. Do we have questions, comments? I'm going to take this mic around. We'll make it a little easier.
I just ask our speakers whether they think there's any correlation between, on the one hand, civility and incivility, and whether the opposing party, whether it's a public official or a body of public officials, or whether it's a legislature, are doing what the primary person believes is the correct thing. I mean, in other words, if you go to a city council meeting and you agree with what the government is doing and the public officials are doing, do you really care whether the officials are being civil or incivil to each other in debate, or whether other people are there opposing what the council do? You're getting your way. Do you care? Or does civility and incivility only really kick in and matter when things you perceive are going wrong in government and among officials? That's my question to any of the three of you, or all. You follow me?
Yeah, I think from my perspective,
Oh, yeah.
is that I think that people tend to be, the people who come and are nice tend to be somewhat upset when they see the behaviors of people being uncivil. That's been my experience, that when people come and they're engaged appropriately in being civil, afterwards someone can say, wow, I can't believe how that person acted. That was really wrong for them to attack you. So my experience is that people who are civil tend to not like to be around that kind of behavior. I'm not sure. People sometimes may confront someone or say, I've heard someone from the podium say, I wish people would be nicer at the podium, or, that was really, these people are serving the community. I've heard some of that, but usually people who are on the receiving end of the incivility or other people try to ignore it almost. And I don't know if that actually helps, but even Robert's Rules of Order, if people come to you and say something totally negative to people, Robert's Rules is just, you should sort of sit there. And we sort of ignore that you said something, and then we move on and we ignore that we just sort of don't acknowledge you were there. I don't know if that's helping or not helping, or if somehow some shaming of it to say, that was really an unkind comment you made, sir. I don't know. I would love to know, to see if there's a better tool than just ignoring it. So.
Any comments from Dr. Dunning and Dr. Matthews?
Well, the comment that I would make is that there's a lot of psychological research, particularly in the area of the law, having to do with when will people live with judicial decisions, even if it goes against their way. And what this work suggests is that people are not only interested in the outcome, did they win or did they lose, are they satisfied or are they unsatisfied with the conclusion, they're also very concerned about the process. And this is known as the issue of procedural justice. And so the research suggests that people are willing to live with decisions or policies that go against them as long as they feel that the process that led to that decision is okay. That they have had input, that they've had some control of saying what they have to say, and that whatever the process was, and this is critical, values them as a member of the community, trusts them, thinks they're fine, respects them, then people are more likely to live with whatever result that happens, even if it's a result that they think is close to disaster. And naturally, the legal system has become quite skilled in this because one could think, and it is true, that the legal system is trying to come to just decisions, but it's also trying to come to decisions that people will live with, that settles the issue, that people won't be uncivil afterwards. So in terms of if someone charged me with looking to what techniques matter, I would actually look to the law because it's concerned with this issue. And I'd be looking in the area of alternative dispute resolution, which is an active area right now that's trying to create informal mechanisms that allow people to have their say and then live with whatever the outcome is, even if it goes against them.
Our observations here very much supportive of what Dr. Dunning had to say. I think for a lot of people, the difficulty is that there are no decisions, that the problems don't get solved, that the system is so polarized that it's dysfunctional. And the polarization feeds on incivility, and incivility promotes the polarization. So the problem is not that the outcome, just that the outcome wasn't what I wanted. The problem is that there was no outcome.
Very interesting.
So one thing that I've noticed is that there's a difficulty of dealing with emotion if you're a public official or you're an elected official, and things such as, aside from the content, things such as tone, volume, and speed of which a person is speaking can turn people off or set a stage for maybe misunderstanding, or actually sets people up to be defensive or offensive. What I've seen is that often that public officials feel that they have to default into one of three modes. One mode is what I call a robot mode, which is they can't really reveal any emotion whatsoever, so they present this sort of a Stepford wife, kind of everything is just sort of blank, and you can't really show any true authenticity of your own personal emotional state. The second state is a Pollyanna state, where elected officials constantly talk about how great their community is and how wonderful everything is, because they're afraid to deal with things that might reflect on their own personal record, and that if somebody criticizes the community, they're criticizing them, and it affects their reelection and their own personal agenda. And then the third is the opposite of the Pollyanna, which is the hypercritical mode, sort of the one example of that is an anti-rabid, anti-government type person who, fervently believes government's evil, so everything that they bring forward is everything gets through that model, and they have a very strong negative approach. So you have these three sort of like default modes: robot, Pollyanna, everything is great, or Chicken Little, the sky is falling modes. And see, if you want some sort of in-between thing where a person is passionate or excited about something, and then they're exhibiting their exuberance about that, that's mistaken for coming off as being over the top and being too opinionated. And so, I think back into examples like a religious example is, for example, there's a thing called righteous anger, where, in religious morality, you're supposed to be careful about certain types of emotional expressions, but then in Christianity, you have Jesus with righteous anger throwing out people out of the temple, and people have said, well, that's fine. You can have expressions of anger if it's so-called righteous anger. So I throw them all out there because it's a very complicated field when we're dealing with people and the emotions that come out, and how do you get past not being a robot or being on a totally positive type of person or a totally negative person, but being an honest, authentic, genuine person with emotional states that fluctuate, and that you have passion about some things, and you can also acknowledge that there's problems in a community and wanting to try to acknowledge those things.
Thank you. Sounds from a very much of a personal perspective. Any comment, Dr. Matthews, Dr. Dunning, Mr. Lahanas?
Well, I was thinking about my time working in the federal government. I was an academic, a history professor, and not a politician, and certainly not a veteran of government service. So when I got to Washington, I asked somebody who'd been in the cabinet for years what it was like. He said, I can describe it for you in one word: instant son of a bitch. The holding a post in a government, I think inevitably places you front and center for a lot of people's maybe righteous anger. The real question is how you live as a human being within those circumstances. And that's a challenge for everybody in public service. I'm sure your city manager can testify to that.
Yeah, I agree with the point about the fact that you look like robots. It's kind of funny because it's almost this, you know, if we ignore what you say, maybe you'll just go away and disappear. You know, we just ignore it. So I think that's kind of a funny, you know, reaction. And in some way, that's what people do. They think there's, you know, everyone kind of ignores if someone is being particularly rude or particularly, you know, uncivil in an act. Everyone just kind of sits and they're almost done. And when they're done, then we'll get back to business. So I'm not sure if that's good or not. It's just what happens.
I think we have time maybe for one very quick question. I have one more in the back, and then we're going to need to wrap it up because we're starting on our second session in this room.
Thank you. I recently read about a new World Bank study that is being treated quite well because it's borrowing on the social and behavioral sciences. It's a World Bank study that talks about mind and society, and they want to borrow from the best around the world. And their idea is that cultural implications can matter. And one thing that my question is, they're borrowing from something in Caracas where they actually leverage shame. And our city manager just mentioned shame, so this came flooding to my mind. They're using shame as a way to bring civil nature to the historic problems around traffic snarls in Caracas. So I'd like the three panelists to talk about how could we leverage, or in a philosophical sense, ought we leverage shame to bring about a civil nature as an antidote to our incivility?
I'm Catholic. That's starting to sound like church.
Someone is driving, someone is, you know, making unkind gestures from their car to other people. If you take a picture of that and pop it on a billboard, will they be, you know, shamed if they're making an angry face? Hey, that might work. Who knows? I'm willing to try it, but I do think that there is some norms when people's behavior looks too outrageous and other people see it. I do sometimes think people kind of sit back and say, geez, did I really act like that? So I certainly would like that. It would be kind of funny to try it in public meetings, you know, to take a picture of someone who's being very unkind and to put a picture up of them. Perhaps it would work. Who knows?
Thank you. Okay, I think we're finished. Want to make a comment? One more?
I just want to make a quick comment. Shaming. Oh yeah, that'll be effective. There's no question about that. Recent research has shown that's not the problem. The real problem is you really have to debate through the ethics of such an intervention. But believe me, it's much more effective than you ever would imagine.
Wasn't that what the pillories and the branding of an A on the forehead were all about? Shaming?
Okay. Stopped adultery, didn't it, is the comment. I don't know if you heard that. All right.
Right.
Thank you, presenters. Thank you, everybody. This was really good.